What's going on, guys? It's your boy Anthony alongside the best Big 3 account in the universe, Big3 N3ws, aka Will, back with another edition of The Fourth Man. Man, this is going to be a good show. We have an awesome interview on the back end. We have a couple things to catch you guys up on in terms of the Big 3, really encouraging things. But first and foremost, as always, my guy, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I got to take the first. I would like to donate my introduction to this episode and give a shout out to my man Anthony Puccio. Ready for this, Anthony?
Always. A little swig of water there.
You're not going to understand what that means, but just wait till this episode comes out, and then I promise you're going to like what I just did there.
Okay. I like that a lot. All right. So get back on track here. Great episode. Glad you're doing well, Will. Got a couple things to catch you guys up on before we get into the interview here. But first, Will, you were telling me something before we jumped on here and started recording, and I told you to stop because I wanted to get first reaction on this, but I think it's really interesting. So I'm gonna kind of level the table for you here, or set the table for you here, right after we get through a little bit of the legwork up front here. Like for always, sure. If you want to find our social media pages, it's at Fourth Man Pod, at Big3 N3ws, at @A_Siggy. We're always making sure you're up to date on all Big 3 news and anything tied to any Big 3 related players, especially Will over there. If you want to watch the show instead of listen to the podcast, it's youtube.com/fourthmanpod. And as always, for those of you listening on Dash Radio on the Nothing But Net channel, appreciate you guys as always, whether you're a first-time listener or you're an every Saturday listener. Really appreciate it because the show pretty much drops and then it's released on Dash Radio. So always a good time if you're listening over there. All right, well, the floor is yours here.
Yeah, I mean, so basically before we got the episode started, I started to tell you this, and I was like, tell me if this is interesting enough for the podcast. And then you were like, before I could even finish it, you're like, yes, say it. So basically, to give a little bit of context, I was looking at the Big 3's Instagram today because they're starting to post again. They posted twice in like the same day, which is like really been something that
Rare.
they haven't been doing. So I was looking and I was like, all right, so we know their preferred method of communication is sliding into people's DMs.
Right.
And it's pretty likely that if you're going to slide into somebody's DMs, you're at least going to hit them with that follow first.
Definitely.
So I said, who are some guys that maybe are either following the Big 3 or that the Big 3 is following who don't play in the Big 3? Because that would be a pretty interesting,
That's some good investigation.
Right.
Like investigation thinking there.
So I looked very briefly, but one interesting name that popped up, I did a little bit of research into it. I did a little background research. I said, maybe this is just a respect thing. Okay. But to be honest with you, it's just interesting. So the only member of the Ball family that the Big 3 seems to follow is LiAngelo Ball.
Interesting. That is
interesting.
To
me is just very interesting. Okay. I don't know about you. That to me is just very like,
Well, I want to tie something in here, and shout out to our boy Shani 2K, but I don't want to say that the Big 3 is just following us necessarily everything we're doing, but I think that we've got their acknowledgement a couple times in the past, especially during season 3 there. I wonder if there's a chance, maybe they looked at the pleas and we're just kind of thinking of people maybe they could DM. We've seen them DM Michael Beasley.
Right.
He's kind of made that public there. But that's really interesting because typically for people to follow the Ball, they follow the whole family. They don't just follow one in particular Ball.
That's right. So I don't know, because you would think, all right, maybe you're following Lonzo, LaMelo, Jello, and then LeVar, like, because they're just, basketball tied figureheads. They're right. Exactly. But to only be following LiAngelo to me is, now I looked at LiAngelo does not follow the Big 3 back. That would have been like, craziness.
Oh, yeah.
But, I don't know. Is it likely that the Big 3 follows Jello, shoots him a DM, and they're like, hey, like, if you're interested in playing, here's how you try out. Here's how you sign up.
I mean, I think it's a good idea on their part because we know what kind of publicity the Ball family can create, especially LeVar for his sons. We see what he's done for Lonzo and LaMelo, but even Jello there as well. And I think something, too, that's interesting is we have to think about Jello's career right now, right? So, like, UCLA didn't go as planned. He played with his brother in Lithuania. And then the most that we've heard from him really is getting an opportunity to play in the G League for the OKC Blue, and he never got that chance because that was right before everything with COVID hit, and then 2019 they shut down the G League. So it's been a while. So at this point, are you looking at every option? From his perspective, maybe not. Maybe, it seems like LeVar could be that type of person that's solely focused on getting all three of his sons in the NBA and wouldn't consider anything else. But then on the flip side, like he started a league like the JBA league in order for his sons to get more run-ins with some like legit athletes and stuff. So like, I don't know. I would hope that Jello would consider that. But that's some interesting, good investigating skills there. Good.
Thank you.
Good stuff there. So let's keep an eye on that. And if you're ever interested in any kind of Big3 rumors, I guess we'll just check out the people they're following, because that could
for sure
lead to something.
I gotta look. That was very briefly. That's like the first guy that I saw that they were following that piqued my interest. I'm sure that if you keep on scrolling through, there's got to be more.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's catch you guys up on a couple of things here. A guy that was recently on our podcast, I should say, Michael Cooper. We told you and we talked about him being nominated to the 2021 Hall of Fame class as a potential entry. Recently, he was just named a finalist for the 2021 class, so congrats to Coach Cooper there. We've talked about this numerous times in the past, especially over the past couple episodes. Very deserving, especially just from a whole resume of basketball that he provides, and just seems like the timing is right and the stars are aligning finally for him.
No, absolutely. I mean, when we had Cooper on, he was just such a humble and just nice guy, and I still sort of pinch myself.
As Larry O'Brien.
But I mean, come on, if you got it, man, you got to flex it. I'd be doing the same thing. But yeah, the fact that he isn't in the Hall of Fame is kind of baffling at this point. I mean, I understand that they sort of, like we see it this year with Bill Russell. Bill Russell is also a finalist for the Hall of Fame, but as a coach.
Yeah.
As not a player. Obviously, Bill Russell was in the Hall of Fame a long time ago. That would have been even crazier. But honestly, Michael Cooper, just for everything that he's done for the teams that he was a part of, he was a steady contributor on one of the more important basketball dynasties or sports dynasties, you can say, of all time.
Definitely.
And even if you take the coaching stuff out of it, I mean, I think the coaching stuff puts him over the top, but even he talks about where he was with the WNBA, and he got in the beginning. I mean, I believe he said he was the first retired player to coach.
Yeah, and he was coaching within the first years. I mean,
yeah, so
pioneer.
He brought legitimacy to that league. So if we're going to give guys laurels, I think we have to recognize everything that he's done for not only men's basketball but women's basketball, and he really has been at the epicenter of so many historical moments for the NBA. And this isn't just some guy sitting on the bench. This is somebody who Larry Bird says is the toughest guy he had to guard. I mean, this is somebody who the Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said, listen, we got to get a stop here. All right, send in Michael Cooper.
Exactly.
So to me, he's listen, you look at that class and you look at the guys that he's going up against, you're like, oh my gosh, like everybody there will probably make the Hall of Fame at some point. I mean, this isn't like the NFL or the MLB where some people are like normally when you're nominated, you will make it eventually. But the fact that Michael Cooper has gotten this far, I would like to see it done this year just for how long he has had to wait. So I just hope that we get to see it. And I think he's more than deserving.
I agree too. And honestly, I mean, I think he's well deserving to go in with this class. As good as this class is, like you said. I mean, if Larry Bird, one of the greatest to do it, is calling somebody the best guy to ever guard me, I mean, that in itself is pretty legit. So, congrats to Coach Cooper there. Very well deserving, and hopefully he goes from finalist to Hall of Fame member there. Last thing here, I know we've talked about it a lot from Joe's perspective, from our perspective, but the Big 3 came out and announced today that Joe Johnson is officially returning to the Big 3, which we kind of already knew, but it's good to have that clarity and understanding from their point as well. But I think it's even more so exciting in the fact that the Big 3 really is coming back. Like, as much as, things are coming out, we still have a little bit of doubt in our minds, I think, of the timing. Not so much of it coming back, but the timing of when it will. Yeah. And, when news will drop. But honestly, this could kind of be the very beginning of the snowball rolling down, a huge hill of information and news coming.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, because Joe Johnson has said before, I mean, the TBT basically invited him. They're like, let's do this. And he's like, I'm waiting for the Big 3. And the whole thing was says he's waiting. Mm-hmm. Now he's not waiting anymore.
Yeah.
So something must have changed between the last time that he reaffirmed his commitment to join the Big 3. I mean, even when he was on All the Smoke, 2 or 3 weeks ago, he said, if the Big 3 comes back, I'll play. Well, now he's playing. So that means that the big three must be coming back.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very interesting to see. Like, I think like we've said, I'm sure when they asked Joe Johnson, like, all right, are you in? I'm sure the first couple of questions were, well, when is this happening? For how long? Where do I have to be? And I'm sure they must have given him some form of an answer. So for him to get his commitment.
Yeah, for them to be able to publicly announce that through their social media to their hundreds of thousands of followers. I mean, definitely.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this was done. I have a feeling that this was probably done a couple days ago, because you saw Jamario Moon tweet and he tagged all the triplets guys and he's like, run it back. So I have a feeling that all of triplets will probably be back. I know that they were all ready to play last summer, so I have a feeling that they're all ready to play again. And I'm sure news must have happened. News must have been information must have been shared to them a couple of days ago for Jamario Moon to make that post. And then the big three just waited a couple of days and then is now posting this about Joe Johnson. But I have a feeling that we're going to see, we've already seen Trilogy basically reaffirm that they're in. We've seen the same thing with Killer Threes basically, and now triplets.
Well, so that's a good point. Coming in. Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you made about, Joe having questions and them being able to answer it. I got to think that they were able to answer those, because Joe's not going to be like, okay, I'm in, if he doesn't know the logistics of it and everything. So that's a really good point there. And I really think this is the beginning of something. It's hard to find where that tipping point is going to be. I feel like we've tried to indicate that 2 or 3 times here, but this really looks like it could be that tipping point, because for the past few posts that the Big 3 has even, put out there, it's mostly just been about the awards that occurred in season 3. Almost like everything up to this point from a social media standpoint almost seems like it's reminding people of what happened in the last season and trying to put it at the forefront of their mind, make sure everyone remembers oh, what a great season this was. And in case, memory doesn't serve you, here's some of the things that happened back in season 3. So we'll see if that is a tipping point there. All I know is I'm excited to see ISO Joe back in there for season 4 and defend his MVP trophy and defend, honestly, for triplets to defend their title.
Yeah, definitely. Joe Johnson was unstoppable in season 3, and triplets were far and away the best team. They just had to really just go out there and earn it. So it's their championship to defend at this point, and I'm really excited. I hope that we will know that it is a good off season if we're going into the season and we're saying, all right, triplets have some competition.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think triplets, it looks like triplets is going to run it back with everybody as long as they can get
it looks like
back,
that. And I think, we've already seen Trilogy put themselves in a position to be true competitors. I just think that they need to have a very solid draft, because that's only 3 guys out of the 6 or 7 that are going to see the floor every game. So, triplets are a deep squad, and we saw that in the championship game especially. I mean, Allen Anderson hit the first 9 points for them?
Yeah.
And that really set them up for success.
Yeah, he was a big glue guy for him. And I think Jamario Moon was too down the stretch there. So
yeah, that was a great trade that they made.
Yeah, I think so too. And, they're not lacking size. They got Big Al in the middle there. So that's a really hard team to compete with there. But I'm excited to see the competition that goes against them. Not going to get, too antsy here, because I know it's still very early on, but definitely piqued my interest there a little bit. Well, that's going to wrap it up for the first half, guys. We appreciate everyone who tuned in. Again, we have an awesome interview on the back end here with our guy, Jeff Kee from G League TV, pretty much the only guy highlighting and showcasing the G League in general. So really cool conversation with him, over 30,000 followers on Instagram and a page that continues to grow, and really good G League insight as well. So awesome interview there. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, give us feedback, make sure we're doing our part and hold us accountable there. Appreciate everyone who tuned in, and let's get to Jeff Kee with G League TV. Okay, today we welcome on the founder and creator of the only page that really highlights and showcases the G League as a whole. That's G League TV founder Jeff Kee here. We appreciate your time, man, and we're really excited to talk about the G League and everything and how it interacts with the Big 3 there.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah. Let's just start here. I mean, how did the page come about? You obviously are very interested and love the G League, but how did you get the idea for the page?
Yeah, so the page actually, I created it last April, so it's been about 11 months or so. And it first started with just a little bit of history. I've been, working in basketball for quite a while now. In high school, I actually started working at the minor league level. And so there's like a semi-pro team in my area. And then in college, I worked for another semi-pro team. And so throughout my life, I've always been a big fan of like these underdog group of players, you know, that don't really get much recognition. And of course, I followed the NBA as well. But I started watching the G League back when it was the D League in around 2015. And so I've been a huge fan ever since then. And then when, you know, COVID struck, I really didn't have anything to do. And so, you know, just being on Instagram all the time, looking at NBA highlights and, of course, following the G League, I was like, you know what, man, I have access to Synergy. Are you guys familiar with that? It's like has all the film, has like
Okay,
G League
yeah.
film,
Yeah,
college
sure.
film and stuff like that. And I have access to all this film in this database. And I love the G League. I kind of want to start my own page. And so I really first started it just as a way to like kind of highlight these guys. And I was thinking if I get a couple thousand followers, that'd be great. And it took a while to get 1,000, but you know, ever since the last maybe like 3 or 4 months or so, it's kind of taken off a little bit. And you know, it's just been a good way of getting some of these guys exposure, and then really showcasing how talented all these guys are. You know, these guys are borderline NBA players, and they don't really get too much hype. And so the page hopefully has been a good resource for them.
Definitely. I think it's been a good resource for, you know, maybe casual fans like us too, you know, just being more um, interested and knowing more about the G League, you know, as you're continuing to highlight that. So you
Right.
made the page, you really saw the growth, you know, as the G League bubble came about. But where did you actually like see where the page turned there and you're like, oh, the page is really growing now? Like at what point did you realize you had something?
I think it was probably maybe a month or two into it when all the players started DMing me for highlights,
Oh,
you
nice.
know? So it was really, I mean, pretty much every day a different player would DM me about making them a highlight reel. And so I was like, oh, you know, this is pretty cool. And I would just do them all for free. I had all the time in the world with everything being shut down. And so I was making them. And then, of course, the page really took off with them reposting the videos. So they'd repost it on their page or on their story. And then all their friends and family or teammates and stuff like that would also repost it. And especially if they were guys from different schools, like, you know, if they played at a big school like a Kentucky or like a Duke or something like that, it would just explode. And so um by that time I kind of knew like if I continue working at this, it might catch on a little bit. And then of course when the season started and Kevin Porter announced that he was playing, and then when Lynn announced that he was playing, suddenly everyone was like, I can't, you know, commenting like they can't wait to see their highlights. And thankfully for me, they had great seasons, and so it kind of
Yeah.
skyrocketed after that.
So you didn't really have to come up with your own content. It was more of like guys almost like gift wrapped you like the content, or they pretty much like served it up and you were able to just kind of put it together and post it.
Well, so using that database with all the film, I'm able to get everyone's highlights from that Synergy database.
Oh, okay.
And so yeah, so they would just come to me and be like, "Could you make me a highlight reel?" And you know, sometimes I would showcase different things. Like Gary Payton, for him, you know, he's the last 3 years he's led the league in steals,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just an example. I would make a video of just showcasing his skills. And I think he's also the best shot blocking guard in basketball, you know? And so I would make a video of just, you know, his chase down blocks or him just, you know, swatting people at the rim into the second row and stuff like that. So, you know, it was more about kind of being creative and showcasing what they're actually good at. Um, and then, you know, like I said, not everyone in the G League is the household name, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, there's a lot of guys that like I said are specialty players, you know, and so they fill a certain role. And so my thing was like, okay, you know, the average 11 points a game or so, but your biggest thing is you're a 3-point shooter. You shot, you know, 42% from the 3-point line. So let me make a video showcasing all your threes, you know, and so hopefully through that, I don't know how many maybe NBA scouts will still watch it, you know, but I think the NBA more than ever is looking for specialty players like that. And so they could watch the video and be like, you know, we're looking for like a 3-point specialist. Maybe this is the type of guy we need.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great point. I mean, we've seen guys like a Duncan Robinson or even like a Dort in Oklahoma, right? Who's really
Right.
just like a defensive stopper. And especially on these championship teams that are really just looking like, all right, like we have the guys who are going to go down and really be the leaders of this offense, but we're going to need people to fill specific roles. And to your credit, I think you've really showcased that the G League is full of guys who can really, you can plug and play them at a lot of different needs and situations. That being said, you talk about the feedback that you've gotten from all these players. Has there been a specific player or maybe a specific group of players or even a team that has just really been sort of, supportive of your page? You mean, maybe from the beginning or just people who that you've noticed?
Yeah, there's been quite a few actually. So one big one has been Rafael Putney. He's the all-time leader in shot and block shots in the G League, and he's become a great friend of mine. He actually sent me his jersey, which I'm wearing right
Oh,
now.
That's sick.
nice. Hey.
He
Nice.
sent me his game-worn jersey from when he played for the Bayhawks, and so he's
That's
been
sick.
great. He and I talked throughout his time with the bubble. This year, he was with the Mad Ants, and then he was with the Iowa Wolves. But Putney has been great. Alize Johnson is a guy that I communicate a lot with. Axel Tupon, who was on
Mm.
the Santa Cruz Warriors, he just got called up by the Milwaukee Bucks. And there's been a lot of smaller ones too. I'm trying to think of some other cool names that you guys might recognize. Oh, you guys said Mo Charlo. I know we
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
Oh yeah.
about Mo's a good friend of mine, and he played in the back when it was the D League for the Reno Bighorns. And so I made a mixtape of him back during his day, and he was an all-star. And so, yeah, Mo and I interact quite a bit as well. But yeah, those have been the main guys that I really, and the last one is Dusty Hannas, who's, in my opinion,
Okay.
the best shooter in the G League. He was on the Santa Cruz Warriors, and he was on the Memphis Hustle last year, averaged about 21 points a game, got caught up a few times. And so those guys I interact with the most.
That's pretty an embarrassment of riches that you can say the Warriors have the best shooter in the NBA and now the G League as well.
Yes, right. And he's one of those specialty players. I'm sure we'll get into a little more about, guys that might deserve call-ups, but if there's any team that would be out there that's looking for strictly, like, not just strictly, but a guy who can just come in and play 10 minutes and drill 3 threes, on 3 for 4 shooting, it's that guy, and so he's been a great guy to communicate with online. And then also I think you could put him at the 3-point line, at any 3-point line, just an open gym, he probably make 95 out of 100 threes.
And so you've mentioned a couple of times now, the G League, they played in a bubble this year.
Yep.
It was a little bit shorter than the NBA bubble, but what has the feedback that you've gotten from those players? I know when the NBA was, I would say, mixed feedback to say the least, but what have you been hearing from the guys in the G League?
The feedback that I've gotten from the players that I talk with is that it's been great. I think also, the G League players, their expectations are a little bit lower in terms of like the standard of living. And they were staying, as far as I know, they were staying in the same hotels and playing in the same courts as the NBA players were. But, I think the NBA players are so used to being wine and dine to an extent that that in a way they kind of forget normal life, because they're used to making, $10 million, $20 million a year. But these G League guys came there, I think, just solely looking for an opportunity, even if it was only 15 games. Now, the season was 15 games, and I thought that was kind of short. I really do wish it was 25 or so, because there were quite a few players that I was interested in looking at this year that didn't get much of an opportunity. And throughout the season, usually the season's significantly longer. So throughout the course, you can kind of be like, oh, they're not playing in the beginning, but they could play if a player gets called up or whatever. But there wasn't that chance for a lot of these guys who were kind of like, glued to the bench if the rotation was kind of deep. But everything that I heard was that, these players came there just looking for an opportunity. They didn't care if, they're being fed, if they weren't being fed gourmet meals or anything like that. They were just hungry to ball.
That's dope. And I'm glad that they enjoyed that, because I feel like that's an experience of in a lifetime, and those guys are just appreciative of the opportunity. So it's good to hear that they really appreciated that. And I want to talk about some of those teams from the bubble and some of those players as well, but just from more so like a fan perspective or even your perspective, what were your thoughts of the G League bubble? I mean, it seems like just from your page growth alone that the G League gained a lot of traction this year, just from the bubble.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this season was definitely the most talent we've ever seen in the G League from top to bottom. I mean, there were a lot of guys on those teams who were maybe getting 10 points, who were capable of getting 20, and there were guys who were getting 10 minutes that are capable of getting 30. And just an example is that there's a guy named Bryce Brown, who was one of my favorite players last year. He played for Auburn, and last year he was just one of the top 5 shooters in the G League. He averaged probably about 16 points a game for the Red Claws. And he had a game where he went 10 for 10, or was it 11 for 11 from the 3-point line in one game, 11 for 11. And so, he was a guy that I was like, oh, he's going to come back and have another great season, hopefully get called up. But he didn't really play that much this year, and that's because the rosters were just so deep. I mean, and just terms of talent, I don't think it's ever been more talented. In terms of just notoriety, having guys like Kevin Porter was huge. Having Jeremy Lin, of course, was huge, and I really just thought that the Ignite team brought so much great exposure. And I think that the way they're handling the situation over there with developing these guys through, mentorship, whether it's having older veteran players on the team, allowing them to take college courses, I think it's going to be huge in a few years. It's big now. It's big now, but I think it's going to be even bigger in a few years. But yeah, just it's been as deep as possible for these. And then also, the one thing that I love was that you never knew on a given night who was going to win, right? And so I know there's seedings and everything like that, and there's a few teams that went on some really crazy runs, like Santa Cruz. They went on a 9-game winning streak, won 10 of their last 11 games, but they ended up losing in the conference finals. And the team that won the championship this year was the Lakeland Magic, who were the 6th seed that lost their best player, Mamadou Diakite, to the NBA. And even with that, he was a leading scorer and rebounder. And even with that, they still found a way to win the championship. So, it was one of those years where it was just so talented. And every team, to an extent, was exciting to watch, that it just bodes so well for the G League in the future, moving forward to next season. And then, this is the 19th season of the G League. So I can't imagine in maybe 10, 15 years, the popularity, I think, will explode.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that there were a lot of teams and a lot of players that really made it exciting. And I think it was a fun product. And to add in the fact that it was on ESPN Plus, maybe sometimes on some of the other ESPN channels there. Right. And I think too, the Ignite team, give them a lot of credit because they were a very fun team. And that's a team that I want to touch on a little bit later in the episode. I think, Santa Cruz Warriors were fun. It was cool to see Jeremy Lin back out there as well. Yep. But I feel like we need to talk about the champion Lakeland Magic and even, the Delaware Blue Coats to an extent, because our guy from the Big 3, Xavier Silas, had a little bit
definitely
of implemented, offense that he added to that team to make them so explosive and help them get to the championship game. But that championship game, what were your thoughts on it? And who are some of the players that you're kind of looking out for that maybe need a little bit more exposure after, being able to go the distance and play at the highest stage there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this whole playoffs was actually kind of weird. Like I said, you never knew who was going to win on a given night, which I think is the exciting part about the G League. And they made it just a 1-game elimination, kind of like with TBT we were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. But the playoffs from top to bottom every game was a blowout. I forgot the actual margin of victory from the first round, the semifinals and the finals, but the margin of victory for the entire playoffs was over 20. And so the championship game itself, I was expecting a little more, just because the Blue Coats, were stacked. They were the only team to be undefeated for a while. I think they started was a 7-0, and then they went on a 4-game losing streak, and then they ended up finding their footing towards the end of the season again. But they were loaded from top to bottom. And then, the Lakeland Magic were a really good team too, despite losing their best player. But they were still loaded from top to bottom too. So I really did think that it was going to be a neck and neck game, 1-game elimination for the championship. But it was a blowout, which made it, I think, a tad bit disappointing. But you're totally right. There are a ton of guys on both teams that deserve call-ups. I mean, just starting with the finals MVP, Devin Kennedy. Devin, and I forgot to mention him as a guy that I talked to as well. I know Devin through the basketball tournament last summer. And then Devin, funny story is that he actually called me the day before the G League finals, called me. And he and I were talking because, and I told him, like, this year you've been one of the better role players in the G League. Last year he was with the Long Island Nets, and he averaged about 15 points a game as a rookie. And he's also one of 3 Ivy League alum in the G League, which is pretty cool. But, Devin and I was like, last year you were averaging more points, but your team wasn't winning. This year, your stats have gone down a little bit, but you're on a great team, so if you can really show out in the championship game, like, who knows what will happen for your future and your chances of getting a call up. And he was like, yeah. And he was like, I promise you, I'm going to show out. I promise you, I'm going to show out. And then he ends up scoring 22 points, and winning the finals MVP. He really put the team on his back. And so, with Devin, every finals MVP from the G League has played the NBA at some point, so I'm hoping that Devin continues in that trend and is called up, whether it's by the Magic or, he has his rights traded to another team. He's deserving of a call up. He's a guy that I think that can really come in off someone's bench for 15 minutes or so right now and probably get you 8, 9, 10 points. And so he's a guy that deserves a call up. Another guy that I love in the Lakeland Magic is Tahir McCall, and he's a 6'5" swingman. He's a guy that doesn't get really that much exposure because his best attribute is on the defensive end, but he led the Lakeland Magic in charges taken this year. He was one of the league leaders in charges taken. He's a guy that I think could lock up, maybe not lock up, but he's a guy that I think could play really good defense on even the better players in the NBA. And so if you wanted, a really nice swingman that can defend three positions, that can rebound the ball. He averaged 7 rebounds a game this year and can also score. I think he shot about 36% from three. He's a really good slasher. He's decently athletic. He's another guy that I think deserves a call up. And then on the Blue Coats, there's a ton of guys. Of course, Paul Reed, he's with the Sixers, and he was just amazing this year in his rookie season. He's probably going to get Rookie of the Year. And so, there's Paul Reed. And then there's Rajon Tucker, who was signed by the Sixers on the Exhibit 10 contract and then played this year for his second year in the G League. Last year, he was second leading scorer in the G League. And so he's a guy that's, everyone knows him for his dunks. I don't know if you've gone on YouTube and just seen like this guy can absolutely fly. He could probably win the NBA dunk contest right now. But Rajon's the type of guy that, even though he's more famous for his dunks, he's just one of the best rim finishers in the league. I mean, because he's 6'3" of just pure steel, and he's developed a really nice mid-range and outside shot as well. And so, those three guys I would love to see called up. And then there's some smaller players like I would love to see Justin Robinson on the Blue Coats get called up as well. He was the point guard this year. He's probably one of the top 5 best pure point guards. He went to Virginia Tech. And so he was with the Wizards for a little bit, didn't get too much run. He's another guy that I think deserves another shot. But yeah, both teams are loaded with guys that have just so much talent. And it's hard because, I mentioned those 4 or so, but you could really make an argument for probably 5 or 6 guys per team for both of those.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I mean, those are obviously, I feel like I sort of adopted the Blue Coats this season because of Xavier Silas, just how well he was doing as offensive coordinator. So that was just really cool to see them go that far. And like you said, Lakeland.
Xavier was a phenomenal player.
Mm-hmm.
When he was in the G League, he was a 20 points per game player as well. And he could, some of his dunks are actually pretty crazy. Before I watched Xavier, he played for the Celtics for a little bit. And then I watched him like a tiny bit in Colorado, but I didn't know he had bounce like that. I mean, he was really throwing out some crazy jams in the G League. And then he played this past year in TBT for Overseas Elite. And so I know he's a big 3 guy as well. But yeah, Xavier, I've talked to him not only at TBT, but through DMs, and he's a great guy too.
I'm glad actually you brought up TBT. I wanted to get into that a little bit. So now you were in the bubble for TBT. What was that environment like? How was that experience?
That experience was fantastic. It was before the NBA bubble, right? And so we didn't really know what to expect. And I don't have any high maintenance tendencies per se. Like, they fed us regular food. We stayed in a great hotel. I thought it was fine, but I think the coolest thing about that experience was that it was 5 weeks of just hotel and gym. Couldn't go anywhere. That's not like the Disney resort that the NBA players and the G League players had, where we had like a pool or anything like that. It was just strictly you're in your hotel room or you're at the gym watching the TBT games going on. And it was awesome because I got to experience being around players all the time, for 5 weeks. And so you're able to like talk to these guys and really get to know them on a personal level. And Joe Johnson was one of those guys, another, Big 3 legend. Joe Johnson was one of those guys. I was in the bubble for 5 weeks. And I'll tell you, for someone that made over $100 million in his career, he was the nicest guy in the world, really nicest guy. And you would just think that someone who's made that much and accomplished that much would have higher standards, but he did everything that a normal player did, never complained about anything. And like I said, balled out and was an absolute fantastic person to deal with too.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And So we've seen sort of, I guess we get into the big three a little bit. We've seen, it's funny, the relationship that the G League and the big three had. It really started as sort of, if you went on a timeline, maybe the average player would go college, G League, NBA, and then finish their career in the big three. But we've really started to see the big three sort of shift towards this platform where maybe guys who would play in the G League or who had G League experience could really use the big three, sort of like a TBT or somewhere almost like overseas experience, as an opportunity to get more tape, more experience, and make it either back to the NBA or to the NBA for the first time. We've seen it with guys like Xavier Silas. We saw it last year, especially with the guy that I love, CJ Leslie on Bivouac.
Right.
In your opinion, who are some guys in the G League now that you saw this season that you think, maybe isn't ready for that NBA call up, but could really benefit the most for maybe a summer, a quick trip in the big three?
That's a great question. If I had to guess, they would probably have to be a veteran player,
Mhm.
that maybe their chances of the NBA have dwindled and they're in their 30s or so. Um, because I just can just imagine the younger guys, even if they're not getting the call up now, they might go overseas and make the big bucks over there. Or, unfortunately, a lot of people would think that whether it's the big three or TBT, they would be like, I don't want to risk anything, in terms of playing in it and maybe getting hurt and then ruining their chances of a summer league or a training camp contract. And so I would say that one of my favorites is this guy, David Stockton, who's John Stockton's son. David's been in the G League since the 2014-15 season. And his rookie year, he averaged like almost 20 and 10. But he's a guy that played a little bit for the Lakers, a little bit for the Kings, and then a little bit for the Utah Jazz. And a guy like him who's been around the G League for, maybe 6 years or so, has played overseas, but is in his early 30s or so. I could see him being like, you know what, man, my whole thing is I just want to take any opportunity playing basketball. And the big three has so much exposure. If he balls out and he has unbelievable shooting range. So if he catches fire during the big three, who knows? Maybe a team calls him up for something, to be one of those specialty players. So David Stockton could definitely be one. I would love to see my man Rafael Putney, whose jersey I'm rocking right now. I would love to see him get, a chance of playing in the league, but he's probably in his early 30s, and unfortunately, the league is looking for younger players. Even though I still think he could compete at that level, I wouldn't be surprised if Rafael is a guy that plays in the big three one day. He's an amazing shot blocker. He's 6'10", can run the floor like a guard. Um, Unbelievable hops. Even just YouTube him, his dunk reel is insane. And so those two guys probably would be the best. But I would love to see David Stockton just because, the mainstream fans don't really know that John Stockton has a son. And
Right.
so it'd be really cool to see, former NBA guys play against John Stockton and NBA fans who don't know that John Stockton has a son, for them to be able to see him on that platform.
Yeah,
What
they could
about
actually both benefit from that, I feel like.
Yeah.
The big three and David Stockton as well. Just having that, like, I guess, like that name recognition, and then the big threes on the big three side. And then for David, it's like, oh, more people are tuning in the big three because of the name recognition, see his
Right.
game a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I was going to ask you specifically, what about the Ignite vets? I thought it was such a cool idea that they were able to bring those guys on.
That's a great point. You're right. That's a great point. I would say that every Ignite vet, except for maybe 3 or so, are looking for another chance at maybe the NBA. So the ones that I can see are not looking towards the NBA are Reggie Hearn, he's a long time G leaguer who didn't really play that much for the Ignite. Bobby Brown, he'd be kind of cool to see in the G League. I'm sorry, in the big three. He just has, he stands 5 feet beyond the 3-point line every game and can just cash him. And then Amir Johnson, you're right. I didn't think about the G League Ignite vets, but those would be probably some good ones as well. So Amir Johnson would be pretty cool. I don't know if Amir Johnson's actually looking towards another stint in the NBA, or if he's just playing for the love of the game, the opportunity to mentor some players and stuff like that. But if he's not looking for another chance in the league and he's just trying to play basketball and have fun, yeah, the big three would be perfect. And so Yeah, I could see those guys as well taking another chance. But Amir played well enough where I think he could probably come back for another G League season. But he could do
Yeah.
both, I guess. He could play in the Big 3 in the summer and then come back to the Ignite team again too.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, and then one that I'm missing out is Jared Jack. I should have
yeah,
mentioned
yeah.
Jared Jack. Would love to see Jared Jack do that. But every once in a while I see Jared Jack, and I know he's probably like 38 years old right now. I always wonder, is he looking for another shot in the NBA? I don't know if it'll ever come. He's really pushing it on the age-wise, but he really has some flashes sometimes this year. And then last year when he was with the Skyforce, that I was like, he can really still play. Like he can really go at it. And so yeah, if it was Jared Jack, Amir Johnson, David Stockton, Rafael Putney, I could see any of those guys really playing in the Big 3.
I feel like Jarrett Jack is one of those guys, especially as like a point guard, where you could just plug him in on any team and he's gonna hold it down for you. Like
Right.
how many teams this man been on? Starting guard goes down and he's the starting point guard for like 30 seasons. Like I know it happened for my Nets. I know it was on the Warriors for a little bit, the Knicks, and
Yeah.
every fan base that has him is like, we got Jarrett Jack. And I was like, I don't know who the hell this guy is. Now all of a sudden he's my starting point guard, and I'm like, oh my god, this guy's the best thing ever. So
Yeah,
I would love to see Jarrett Jack.
Jared Jack is someone too that we were really touching on, like starting to speculate on, and then he joined the TBT. And why Jack's name might be interesting more now is because you mentioned some of those TBT guys like Putney, Putney and Jack. They played with Nitty or Frank Nitty. They played with Xavier Silas. They played with Joe in the TBT. Amir Johnson's a guy that played with a bunch of the Big 3 dudes in the 5 tournament that happened last summer. So I think all those guys could fit in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the same thing about Darren Collison, going off topic a little bit, but Darren Collison was one of those guys where I was like, you could probably just throw him in any NBA roster and he'd make a difference, even though he's probably pushing like 33 years old right now. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. One point that I wanted to touch on just a little bit was like, I really do have so much respect for the veterans, especially like the old NBA ones that come back and play in the G League, because there was at one point, and this is maybe not so much the case now, but a few years ago, where the G League was really considered, somewhere where you go to die, essentially. They're on their last leg and they're just dying for one more shot and they're totally washed up, but it's not the case, and so I have a lot of respect for these guys that have had long NBA careers and have made, millions and millions of dollars. Like, I bet you looked at Jared Jack's Basketball Reference page, he's probably made 80 million plus, in his career. But they just do it out of the love of the game. That's why, like, when Nate Robinson came back for the Delaware 87ers, I was like, you know what? Respect to Nate. When Baron Davis did the same thing with the 87, I said, respect to Baron, because Baron doesn't need any money. Nate doesn't need any money. He doesn't need to prove anything at the next level. But they just do it because they love the game. And they're desperate for another shot, of course. But I think it all stems, and the same thing we talked about with Joe Johnson being, 40 years old now, still playing ball. They're just doing it because they love to hoop.
Yeah. Well, that actually segues into a good question that I wanted to ask you here. I want to hear your thoughts on, we've kind of seen the NBA shift toward wanting younger guys that have potential over those savvy vets a little bit.
Right.
And you, as a guy who's an advocate for the G League, are you an advocate for the younger potential, or do you like having a few veterans on the team over the young potential?
Are you talking about on an NBA roster or on
an NBA roster?
On an NBA roster? Ooh, I would say if you're rebuilding, then certainly the younger guy, just to see what he has in the tank. And like I said, there's just so many talented G League players that deserve a call up, and young and old. But the thing about the young guys is that the young guys, you could probably maybe wait a season or so, right, and see how they continue to play to really get a feel of them, and then call them up. But I think it just depends on what the team needs. If it's a veteran team that's competing for a championship, I can see them calling up like the older guy, and saying, we can plug you in right now and you be ready for the moment, because a lot of times you don't know what you're getting out of these young guys. They might be able to put up 25 points at the G League level, but are they mentally strong enough to be thrown in a Western Conference Finals game, and score 10 points off the bench, right? So I think a lot of times with the mentality, depending on what you need, if you're a team that's going to make a deep playoff run, you'll go with the veteran. But if you're a young team like the Rockets just called up Kevin Porter, of course, and then they called up KJ Martin and also Anthony Lamb. And then hopefully next one is Armani Brooks on the Vipers. So they're calling up all these guys. They're just really testing them to see what they have in the tank, because they're not going anywhere this year, and they're hopefully looking for the first pick. So it just really depends on what the team needs at the given moment.
That's fair, and I think that we talked about it kind of being on a collision course with the Big Three and the G League. It's just so interesting now that there's so many different paths that you can really take to the NBA. There's those two. People are going overseas and then going in there. People are going to prep schools and then going to the NBA.
Right.
Where you've talked about how you feel like the G League 15 years from now is going to be one of the better options out there. But where do you feel like outside of this bubble season, where do you feel like they really made like significant improvements, going from the D League to the G League, to now being at the point where they're at right now?
Yeah, I think the thing about the G League is that it all depends on the success of the G League. To me, is dependent on how they play in the NBA, right? So the way that the G League gets credibility is they play well at the G League level, and then they get called up, and then they play well at the NBA level, And so a lot of the successes and the reason for its rise in popularity is because the guys that have come from the G League have also balled out in the NBA, whether it's like a Pascal Siakam or a Fred VanVleet or, Chris Middleton or Rudy Gobert. These guys have been stars in the G League, and then they've gone to the NBA and made major successes, whether it's winning a championship or making all-star appearances. And so the growth of the G League is really dependent on their successes in the big leagues. But I would say that especially like moving forward, I would love to see the NBA start emphasizing the G League more. Like, how we always see NBA players and the NBA itself really push the WNBA.
Mm-hmm.
I would, that's great and everything like that. But I never see anything about whether it's LeBron or Chris Paul or Donovan Mitchell, whoever. I never see them make any statements about the G League itself. Whether it's like, go out and watch a game or support these guys who are on the rise and are the next wave of NBA talent and stuff like that. And so I think that, having those guys as really selling points, if LeBron said something about the G League, then millions of people would be like, you know what, I might give it a chance, right? Just because
right.
his following is so huge and stuff like that. And so I would love to see like the NBA start pushing it more and promoting it more, whether commercials and having it on ESPN. I know we talked about before it's on ESPN Plus, which was great. That was a big step this year because it was on Twitch before, and some of the games were on Twitch this year as well. But the Twitch viewing numbers in the past have always been really low because I think that people are like, oh, Twitch, like, what is that? Do I have to make an account or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then the same thing with ESPN Plus is that, the reason why I think it was good to have games on ESPN2 and hopefully more next year. I would love to see them only being aired on ESPN Plus or regular ESPN or ESPN News. But the thing about ESPN Plus is that you have to have an account as well. And so there's tons of people that are cut off from watching those games because they don't want to pay the $10 a month or so, to get the streaming just for a G League season. But, hopefully they get a better TV contract. Hopefully the NBA starts to push it more. In terms of like other ways that can grow is like the Ignite team, I think is the best way to really garner popularity, just because there's a lot of hype on high school hoops and there has been for a long time, so they can continue getting these, top tier prospects to play for the team. It's going to just draw so much attention. I know like Jalen Green, Isaiah Todd, Dasha Nicks, all those guys were top 20 and 5-star guys on Rivals, right? So they're really getting like the cream of the crop guys, and they continue to do that and also continue to get a lot of the elite overseas talent too. Like this year they had Principal Singh, who didn't really play that much, but he's considered the top talent over in India. And then they had Kai Soto, who was the top talent from the Philippines, and he didn't play at all. But they did have these guys signed. And so if they continue to like mesh these, younger stars into the G League, it'll start taking off as well. But did I answer your question? Is that
yeah. No,
okay.
definitely.
I wasn't sure if I was answering the question correctly. But another thing is that I think the G League itself needs to do a better job of actually promoting the players that are doing well in the NBA. Just an example that I had was like Chris Boucher on the Toronto Raptors. He was the G League Defensive Player of the Year and the G League MVP. It's the first time that's ever been done. He averaged like 27 and 11 a couple years ago with the Raptors on 05. And just the other week, he had a 30-point game followed by a 29-point game. And he's having a career year like, 14-7 or something like that. But I don't really see him being advertised. And so, the biggest thing that the G League needs to do is make people understand, like, hey, he's one of our products. He's a guy that started here and now look at what he's doing. I know he's probably about like 28 years old right now. And, in a few years, I can see him being like an 18-9 player or so. But the G League itself needs to be like, that's our guy, like Rudy Gobert is our guy. He was the only all-star this year that had G League experience. That's our guy. So if they continue to do that and showcase like just how many great players have come from the league, I'm sure that they'll do much better in terms of attendance and notoriety and stuff like that.
Do you think we're ever going to get to a spot where it's like comparable to a soccer or a baseball, where it's almost like these minor league systems and these academies where these kids are going to be, claimed by a team coming out of, some AAU circuit, and then they're just in these development systems for, instead of just maybe 1 year or 2 years, like in the G League now, for 5, 6, 10 years? Do you think the NBA, number one, do you think we're moving towards that point? Do you think that's something the NBA wants? And do you think that's possibly ever going to happen?
I think it could, honestly. I think it could be in the future. I'll say this. I think that the G League, if they do want to go down that path, well, let me start off by saying I do like college basketball as well.
Mm-hmm.
I work for my UMBC team. And so I like college basketball. I'd like when, stars go and play at, whatever universities because it's entertaining to watch. But I understand there's the huge dilemma now, whether they should pay athletes and, whether they should be able to market themselves and things like that, which is totally understandable. But in my opinion, the G League right now doesn't pay enough for people to be in there for 10 years or so, especially back in the day when they were making just like pennies. Now that the salaries have gone up, they could be making like, 60,000, 70,000 or so. But for them to stick around for, 5-6 years making that money when they could probably be making more money overseas, I can see if the salaries go up, that happening, but not until they start paying a little bit more, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, we do see guys like David Stockton who, like you mentioned before, that they do stay in the league for a while. And I think a great point you made is like the G League needs to highlight their players more. But in retrospect to what you were talking about earlier, like if the NBA was pushing this as well, like let's just say the Raptors are playing on ESPN one night, and they talk about Chris Boucher and his time in the G League. I think that could help promote the league in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's David Stockton's a unique one. He has played in the G League for a long time. I wonder if it's because, he has had maybe his family is a little bit better off financially, but the guys who might need the money a little bit more would just take the overseas gig if they're paying more.
That's a good point too. True. Well, and I think as like the G League continues to develop too, and as like we get past the G League season a little bit more, we might start to hear about some of those names just on those ESPN games or on the, I guess, like bigger televised games on TNT and stuff.
Right.
Because I felt like for Will and I, just from a Big3 standpoint, we were always looking for that for Joe Johnson. We were like, we want them to talk about his MVP season in the Big3 where he just dominated a ton of professional guys, even if it is from a 3-on-3 standpoint. And I think that's the same thing, like gratification you're looking for. It's like, okay, we want to hear how well he did in order to get this point to now be in a successful position.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, some of these G League players really do have amazing stories, that I think should be highlighted more as well.
Was Jonathan Simmons the guy who tried out for the D League team? D League team back in the day?
Yep. Yeah, he paid $150 for his tryout. And well, there's that, and then there's a few G League guys that have played like D2 ball, and then there's been a few that have played D3, so there's
even cool like the international guys coming over, like the young guys, like Soto is like a guy I follow. I feel like follow these guys from their sophomore year in high school and on. It's just someone I've been following because he's so massive. He's so big,
Yeah.
you know, it's just, you want to see how that translates.
Absolutely. And Kai was a guy that I was really hoping to see play in the G League this year because, you know, he's 7'3", right? And he's pretty skilled. He's pretty skilled. He has a nice little touch. But
I just want to see how he moves a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I wanted to see how he would do against more physical and broader, bigger bigs, you know, bigger
that too,
you know, post players and stuff like that. Like, would he struggle against the physicality? You know what I mean? Would he be pushed around even though he's 7'3"? He's not very he's probably only like what 230 or something like that, you know? And so would he get pushed around a little bit? So I was really hoping to see him play, but you know, hopefully we'll just see him play at the NBA level. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that.
Last thing, I feel like we'd be doing the G League a disservice if we didn't talk more about Ignite. I know we've touched on them a little bit, and I know the point of your page is to expose guys that aren't being exposed. But that team is just, it's fun to watch. That first opening game between them and Santa Cruz, I was so hyped for just because of like all the pieces that they had and who the Santa Cruz Warriors had, you know, even like guys like Nico Mannion and Axel Tupain, who you talked about earlier. But out of that Ignite team, you named Jalen Green and Isaiah Todd, even Jonathan Kuminga is one that I really like. How many of those guys do you feel like are going to go within the lottery?
It's a good question. I think two guaranteed will be top 5. Whether it's Jalen, well, that being Jalen and Jonathan being the top 5.
I like Isaiah Todd's game a lot. That's why
I love Isaiah Todd's game. I could see Isaiah going late first round.
Okay.
Or so, late first round. And then my favorite out of all of them was Dasha Nicks. And so because, you know, Dasha Nicks, he's first off, he's, for being 19 years old, he's unbelievably smart and savvy. You know, he plays like a seasoned veteran, even though he's a teenager still. But Dasha, he's not super athletic. He's not super strong. And the other day, I'm sorry, not super athletic, not super quick. He's super strong, not super athletic and not super quick. But he reminds me a lot of like Andre Miller, and that's who he's been the player he's been compared to quite a bit. But Andre was a phenomenal point guard at the NBA level. I mean, he was probably in his prime, you know, 15 and 8 player, you know, 15 points, 8 assists. And so, but you know, part of me thinks that he could struggle against this new wave of point guards that are just unbelievably quick and athletic, you know? And in that sense, I could see him maybe going like in the second round. But yeah, it's 2 for sure. 2 are going top 5. And then the other 2, I think Isaiah's definitely going in the first round, in my opinion. Then Dasha will probably be a second rounder, I think.
Okay. I was trying to think of that too, because you got Jalen Green and Kuminga, but then if you think of the top 3 college guys that are probably going to go into the draft, it's Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, and Jalen Suggs, probably, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll have to keep an eye on that for sure. And I think, you know, only more excitement to come for the G League, you know, as we continue to move on, you know, in more years.
For sure, man. I can't wait to see how it really pans out. And that goes the same thing with the Big 3. I was disappointed last year when the Big 3 didn't have a season. You know, and
we were too.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, I was disappointed. I totally understood why. But you know, the Big 3 is so fun for me, at least, because I actually kind of prefer to see these guys play at an old age than when they were young. You know, like if someone were to be like, you can watch, you know, Jermaine O'Neal as a 25-year-old or Jermaine O'Neal as a 40-year-old, part of me would be like, I don't know, I'm really curious to see how Jermaine O'Neal would hold up as a 40-year-old, you know? And then, and so, you know, in a few years, it's already gained so much popularity. I mean, like their Instagram has probably like 500,000 followers, something like that.
Yeah,
you know?
it's crazy.
Yeah, they're up there.
Yeah, it's definitely been up there. So, so they're only going to grow, and I think, you know, hopefully the G League grows, and hopefully the Big 3 grows, and that's good for both of us.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think all these complementary too. I think just opening the minds of fans is going to be good for everybody, and having more leagues is going to help with that. So hopefully we see that growth from both leagues. Want to say thank you for coming on. I guess really educating us more on the G League, and look to see like, you know, what you have in store for G League TV and what the G League has in store, you know, for you to be able to continue to put the content out there.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you. This is my first podcast appearance. So
No way.
First podcast.
Feel honored. There's more to come.
Yeah. Hopefully. But I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you guys.
Absolutely, Jeff. Yeah. Thank you so much. All right, guys, that was our interview with Jeff Kee from G League TV. I'll tell you what, Anthony, that conversation went a lot of places, and we were actually able to talk with Jeff for a pretty decent amount of time after the cameras cut.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited just to see what Jeff has in store for us, and I'm just really excited to see, the future of the G League and the future of the Big Three. Like we said a couple of times in the interview, it really does seem like we are on a collision course, just for those two different platforms for basketball players to make the NBA. So I'm excited to see what the future holds, and I appreciate everybody who took the time out of their day to listen to us. I appreciate everybody who's listening on Dash, listening on their preferred podcast platforms, listening, or I should say watching us on YouTube. Thank you guys, and we will see you next week.